You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me, as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how goes it out there in Iowa?
Hey, it's going pretty well. It looks like the weather's going to not turn as badly as they said, although I'm from the Quad Cities originally, so they really do not need that flooding, so hopefully the rain can hold off for a little bit longer.
Well, we also have a great guest for you, all of you Bronco fans out there today, and we have Scott Dochterman coming on to our show. And Scott covers the Iowa Hawkeyes football program for The Athletic, and really has his pulse on the program as much as anyone in the industry. And so we're really, really excited to have him on the show to especially talk about our new first-round pick, Noah Fant, the new shiny toy for the Broncos offense, and just get his perspective of his time there at Iowa and what he's going to be bringing to the Broncos. But Scott, thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, I'm glad to be on with you guys. I'm really excited.
And props to you for calling out that the Denver Broncos would be selecting Noah Fant. I think you did have him at 10 originally, but, I mean, getting him at 20, even better value. And I think you also called out Hawkinson to Detroit at 8.
Yeah, I got kind of lucky there. I mean, really, it was just about finding the right fit for those teams and kind of that proximity of where you might think they might be picked. And really, there were about four or five teams, I thought, from 7 to 12 that had a real good chance of grabbing either one of those tight ends. But I thought, based on what those teams need, those were the perfect spots. I thought Hawkinson needed to go to Detroit. They need to set a tone and image. He's that type of a player, an inline blocker, but also, good on third down. They're terrible third down passing team last year. And then, of course, Noah Fant, as you guys know, Denver was a pretty good, running team last year. I think they were 4th in the NFL, but so even though he's a good blocker, not necessarily a great blocker, but they can use him more to stretch the field and be that kind of player that I think that Denver could really use. So I was happy that both of them went to good spots where I think they'll both be utilized effectively.
And I got to ask, do you have next week's Powerball numbers?
I wish.
Oh, man.
Yeah, maybe I'd start my own draft website if I hit the lottery, and I'll hire you guys to join me.
Hey, that's
numbers
we'll
open. Take that. All right. Well, we want to make sure that you can also find all of us guys on Twitter. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH, and of course, you can find Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And Scott, where can our fans find all of your work?
Yeah, I'm at The Athletic, so The Athletic CFB Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is at Scott Dochterman, and also you can find me on on the Athletics college football page most of the time under the Iowa tab. We've got tabs for, probably 40, 45 different teams. So that's where most of my work is published. So yeah, please subscribe to The Athletic. I think we're kind of forming this comprehensive website that hits every major sport from college football to the NHL to Major League Baseball. So it's been great to be a part of it. We have 300 writers roughly now.
Yeah, I love The Athletic. I'm subscribed to The Athletic. It's one of the few websites that I was like, that's worth the money. And you guys produce great work out there. But we also want to let you know you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod, and make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input. You can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of the 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Digital. Find ours and our co-writers' articles on all things pertaining to your Denver Broncos. And also, if you enjoy our show, make sure you head on over and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes. We're Building the Broncos along with Huddle Up are found under the Huddle Up podcast. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Well, like we said, we're excited to have you on here, Scott, to talk about Noah Fant. 3 years there at Iowa, one of the more impressive weapons in all of college football this last year. I mean, you're looking at a guy with 4.5 speed, height, strength, ability in the red zone, just a little bit of everything that you want in a tight end position. And I guess let's just start with who he is as a player. What are some strengths of his game, and what are some weaknesses when it comes to what he really needs to work on if he's going to become that great all-around tight end in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with his strengths. I mean, athletically, I don't think that Iowa's had a tight end like him in really in the 20 years under Kirk Ferentz. Probably the closest one athletically is Dallas Clark back in 2002, because, except Noah has that just beautiful blend of he's 6'5", 250, can run 4.5, can, agility wise is as good or better than anybody. So he's just got that perfect blend for what you want out of that position group. And then how does that translate on the field? Well, when you see him try to go, there very rarely were guys going one-on-one with him. A linebacker would be a death sentence, and then a safety would be too small. So really, especially if you went vertical with him, it was a very much a mismatch. I think we saw that a lot against Indiana. A game where both he and TJ Hawkinson had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. That it was just impossible for a safety or a linebacker to keep up with him. But and then as far as there's nobody better in the country when it came to the red zone. I mean, he had 21 targets, 15 catches, 12 of which were touchdowns, which was the best mark in the country the last 2 years. So when he's in the red zone, he's a mismatch that Iowa did not exploit, frankly, nearly enough. There was one game in particular, Wisconsin, where he's out on an island by himself with a defensive back one-on-one, and I'm thinking, just throw it to him. You could just see it. He could run a slant or a go, either one, a fade in the back of the end zone, and it would have been 6. And instead, Iowa didn't. And I didn't think they used him effectively enough in that regard. Now, on the flip side, I think he does have some weaknesses that need to be shored up. And among those, I think, is his pass catching a little bit. I look at, a lot of times he was catching passes, he wasn't high pointing the ball as much as he should, catches passes near his hip. Sometimes he was dropping passes. There were 3 drops that were really kind of, one wasn't really critical, but what it was important. That was right, I think, the second play of the season this year, against Northern Illinois. He was wide open, and he drops a long pass that would have been a touchdown for sure. In 2017, he had 2 critical drops, one against Wisconsin, where Iowa's offense was just battered bloody, but they're still in the game at that point, down 3 points, and he kind of gained some separation from the corner or the safety, I should say. And he dropped a pass that was wide open. The next play, they fumble, and Wisconsin returns it for a touchdown. The game's over. And then against Wisconsin in an overtime game, he drops it off a stick route. Ball hit him in the hands and just fell. He just didn't look it all the way through. So I think in some ways his pass catching ability can be improved better with the Denver Broncos than at the University of Iowa. I think they'll have a more veteran, I'm sure he'll work with the wide receivers coach, and it's going to be a lot of hand-eye coordination. It's going to be a little bit more, and I think he can get better in that regard. I don't think this is something that you just live with. So I would put that as probably his top, is probably his top issue. And then, as far as blocking, I think that was I think people gave him an unfair rap. He was pretty good as a blocker. It was just he was next to one of the best tight ends I've ever seen in TJ Hawkinson. So I think he'll be good. Well, he won't be able to necessarily blow guys off the line of scrimmage the way Hawkinson does, but he'll get in front of them. He'll displace them a little bit and help the running game in that regard. And another kind of unfair criticism I've seen of him is lacking broken tackles. Well, he didn't have to break very many tackles when he got past the secondary. So I didn't really think that was a truthful I thought that was more of an unfair jab at him. So if I was to really be either critical or areas where I think he needs to improve is I do think, he needs to get a little bit better as a blocker. But I think, getting with the right wide receivers coach, tight ends coach to really work on catching the ball consistently. I think if he can do that, he can realize his potential.
Do you have any concerns about his contested catch ability? It's kind of a little bit of for me at least, an O.J. Howard thing where, when the Crimson Tide were getting the ball to O.J. Howard, you know what? He was wide open. there's not many chances where the quarterback, whether it be the offensive system or whatever, was giving him a chance to make those contested catches. And that's kind of like what I saw with Fant as well. I mean, how many chances did he actually get to make those contested catches? There's questions about his toughness. Sometimes he can get a little bit displaced when he's kind of running over the middle with linebackers kind of clutching him out of the point of attack, so to speak. But is that a concern with you, the contested catchability, or is it just something that it's kind of a wait and see because we didn't really get a chance to see it so much at Iowa?
I would wait and see a little bit more on this. This is where I thought Iowa really failed Noah Fant more than anything else. Was he had so many with that kind of vertical and that kind of ability. They should have put him up one-on-one in several situations, especially near the goal line, but also out in space where he can make a play on the ball. And they didn't allow him to do that very often. And when he got into third down situations, I mean, TJ Hawkinson was really good. I mean, I think he had one drop all year. And, so it's hard to blame him. And, the other part was, Iowa only had, I think it was 62% of its plays with two tight ends on the field, some of which weren't including Fant. And he played, 200 and some odd snaps less than TJ Hawkinson. And that was due not to his ability or anything he did. It was Iowa's offense. So I don't see him as a major problem in this area. As far as contested catches go, I'm sure Denver is going to give him that opportunity because the windows are so small. So I want to see how his hand-eye coordination, his hand strength, how that comes to play when he has a different, more up-to-date offensive system that allows him to make plays on the ball, because I don't know that we know that answer based on what we saw at Iowa.
For sure. And speaking about, what we saw at Iowa, I feel like a lot of fans this past year following the Iowa Hawkeyes were a little bit, I feel like Fant didn't reach the level of expectations many had for him. Kind of Hawkinson filled in some of that production void that many were expecting with Fant. Would you say that's more of an offensive system failure, or was it play calling? Is it the quarterback maybe being a little bit conservative when they're throwing it to Fant? Lack of outside weapons to create space out there. I mean, there's also some talk that he might have had a concussion this year at that end around against Minnesota, had a hip issue, I believe, against UNI. What do you think the main issue is that, he still had a good statistical year, make no mistake about it. And he's playing with the number 8 overall pick tight end across from him. So there's only so many passes to go around in that regard. But still 39 receptions, 519 yards and 7 touchdowns, nothing to laugh at. But what do you think about the reason is that he didn't really live up to the heightened expectations that many had to him this year?
I think it had to do, let's start with Iowa's offense. Iowa is it's still trying to get out of that, that foundation that it just is relentlessly sticking to. And that is inline tight end, move tight end, and it just doesn't allow for a lot of variation from that. Now, they did increase the number of snaps that the two tight ends were on the field to past 60%. But with you have 2 first-round draft picks, you've got to get them out there 80, and that became a major sticking point throughout the season. A lot of times for his family on social media, and Noah was very you could tell he was upset. I think fans were uncertain because at wide receiver there was certainly not equal to the level of talent there was at tight end. So, he played a lot of move tight end, sometimes in the slot, but not enough. And so I'm gonna go with a lot of those issues related to Iowa, and I've called them out for it. Against Northwestern especially, he only played 9 plays in the second half, and he was fine. He was healthy. So that, I think, I'd feel secure in saying that there was a little bit of a disagreement between he and offensive coordinator Brian Ferentz, which kind of allowed that. Now, that's not the entire reason, though. Injuries were a factor. He hurt his hip against Northern Iowa, but he played the next week against Wisconsin and caught 2 touchdown passes. He did have a concussion against Minnesota. He wasn't allowed to even practice until the Friday before the Indiana game. And the Indiana game, he had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Probably should not have played, though. That was something that he mentioned later on. The emergence of TJ Hawkinson, though, you cannot discount. And that there's only one football, and Iowa's married to the running game. So you've got to account for that. And Hawkinson is, if there was anybody better than Fant in the country, it was Hawkinson. And I think they're both different types of tight ends. But, certainly TJ Hawkinson was the more consistent blocker, a dominant blocker at times. Fant was very good, but he's more of an inline guy. And then on third downs, nobody was better, either stretching the field or making contested catches or getting first downs than TJ Hawkinson. In fact, he had 7 catches at 25 plus yards on third down alone. So that was really hard. But there was a lot of attention on Fant, which is why the offensive, why the coaches in the league voted him first team over TJ Hawkinson. There have been multiple times, and the only touchdown Iowa scored against Northwestern, 3 different defenders went with Fant, and none of them went with Amir Smith-Marset on a touchdown route. So he had commanded attention on each and every snap because athletically he was superior to whoever was on the field. So I think I would blame Iowa for not getting him on the field enough. Statistics weren't bad. They should have been more. There should have been at least probably 10 more catches. They should have hit, and his quarterback at times was inconsistent. At Penn State, he didn't get even a target until the fourth quarter. I remember tweeting during that game, your first round draft pick is running wild across the middle of the field and wide open, and your quarterback's not looking at him. That's a problem. So I think in some ways he may have contributed a little bit, but I would blame everybody else around him, not Noah Fant.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to touch on one of your points you brought up there about, opposing defensive coordinators really, to me, I didn't have access to the all-22 or anything, but it seemed to me that Noah Fant was still the guy that defensive coordinators were planning against, where, obviously Hawkinson's a great player. He's going to get his still, but it looked like to me that opposing defensive coordinators were making it that, Noah Fant, that is the guy that is the one that we have to watch out for, whether it be double teams, really being physical with him when he's getting off the line of scrimmage, making sure that he doesn't get a clean release or anything like that. Is that what you saw as well? Because obviously Hawkinson went 8 overall, probably the more complete tight end, not probably the more complete tight end. But I would argue that as far as what opened up the offense for the Hawkeyes, it might have been, at least in the passing game, it might have been Fant.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Because you did see that a lot. I think, and maybe one of the scheme fits that worked for them was a lot of times they used him in motion off the line of scrimmage, so he didn't get jammed as much. But you could tell the defenses were very concerned about him because he was the one player on the field that could beat you. Now, Hawkinson emerged as that threat midway through the season, but everybody already had a book on Fant. He had 11 touchdown passes as a sophomore, and a lot of them were long-ranging touchdown passes, either on fade routes or crossing routes or what have you. So everybody had the book on Fant. They knew that he was a difficult matchup, so they made sure we're not going to let him beat you. We'll let the tight end who catches the ball for the first down. Then I don't think it wasn't until probably November that everybody realized, TJ Hawkins is really good too. So I think that was probably part of it at that point, was just defenses, gearing up for Fant. I still think that Iowa let a lot of opportunities go with him. Iowa didn't allow him to make plays, which I kind of use this comparison. In basketball, if you've got a guy like that, if you got 2 of the best 3 small forwards in the Big Ten, they're going to find a way to get them on the court at the same time. Iowa didn't do that enough. I thought they should have been on the field together 80% of the time. If that means making Noah Fant play the X once in a while, do it. If that means the slot, do it. They just didn't do it enough. So, and I think defensive coordinators were very much thankful for that, especially against Northwestern and probably Penn State, because Iowa lost 4 very close games that he could have tipped the game in their balance.
For sure. And now talking about Iowa, he's definitely a program that's starting to get the reputation for being tight end U, and, obviously sending a lot of good players to the NFL. However, typically for seeing tight ends in the NFL, drafted first round or not, it takes, 2-3 seasons for tight ends to really start to make an impact, a statistical impact. Is there something that you could say might be a little bit different there, considering he's coming from Iowa? It's not like Evan Ingram coming from Ole Miss or David Njoku coming from Miami, where Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson, but specifically Noah Fant, is going to be more ready to make a year 1 impact compared to the average tight end drafted into the NFL?
Without a doubt. I think you look at George Kittle and kind of use that as a template. But I think Noah Fant's a little bit better athlete. George is probably my favorite player I've ever covered, the most interesting guy I've ever met. But I would say that, Noah understands how to block in a zone blocking scheme, or he understands how to put his fist in the ground, come off the ball, with leverage, block the right way. A lot of tight ends, especially pass catchers in college, are off the line of scrimmage. They're flexed. They don't really block other than get in front of a guy and try to push him. So he's going to be able to walk in and understand the concepts that are being taught with him in the running game. Whereas in David Njoku, for instance, has struggled a little bit with that. Athletically, David Njoku's off the charts, but he's not quite. But Fant has, that on top of him. Plus, he can make those catches that you need him to. You can move him around. I mean, not knowing totally Denver's tight end situation, but Jeff Heuerman sounds like he could probably still be a stable force as the inline blocker. And it seems like that's where Big Ten tight ends go to die, is Denver. But
yeah, unfortunately,
Jake Butt, Troy Fumagalli, all these guys. But I do think that he's able to do what you need him to do. If that's a secondary tight end early till he gets acclimated to the offense by midseason, could probably take another step. So yeah, I think he's by coming from Iowa, knowing how to block, I think he's more ready made than a lot of other tight ends coming out of college.
All right. You're talking. Sorry. Go ahead, Carl.
Well, you'd mentioned earlier about picking Fant to come to the Broncos. What was it really that you liked about that fit for the Broncos?
I think, starting off, I think you looked at what Denver's numbers were with Heuerman, for instance, 31 catches, 9.1 yards per catch and only 2 touchdowns out of that position. You need to get more than that. And then you look at the red zone efficiency that Noah Fant was able to bring to Iowa and what Denver didn't have with, it's Case Keenum, but certainly when you're 29th in red zone completion percentage and 31st and third down passes turning into first downs, you need somebody who's really capable, especially in the red zone. And that's what Fant is. I mean, is in, over 2 years, in the red zone, his 57.1% touchdown rate was the best in the country, regardless of tight end or wide receiver. So I think when you're trying to match up, okay, you've got a guy who's great in the red zone with a team that's not great in the red zone. I think that's just really helpful for what the Broncos are. And then also I would say that, Denver, the fact that Denver doesn't necessarily need a power blocker, a TJ Hawkinson, by running 4.9 yards per carry, that I think that allows him to kind of become that move tight end, that threat vertically that you can use, which would actually help the offense rather than force him, hey, we really need you to block and block a lot right away. I think it allows him to grow as a receiver first, then kind of work his way into becoming a full service tight end in the blocking capacity.
I think if it was the same system that we had last year, I would not like this pick for the Broncos. You had talked about Case Keenum just not being very good about getting the ball to the tight end. He was not good over the middle. I mean, there's no getting around that. He hated throwing over the middle. I've watched the all 22 for the Broncos, and their slot receiver was open about half the time, and he just would never even look that way. But now with Joe Flacco, with Scangarello as the coordinator who loves that kind of offense that you build around a tight end, that you scheme them open. And I mean, then they go out and draft a quarterback and Drew Lock, who actually had a pretty good season with his tight end in Albert Okoronkwo. I can't even say that name. There you go. Yeah. But I mean, he had 43 receptions this last year, almost 500 yards. And so you can see he loves the tight end position as well. And so I feel like they have quarterbacks, they have a system that's really built to have a tight end like Noah Fant to actually come out and be an impact player day one.
Yeah, I think so. And, you could do so many different things with him, even more so than Hawkinson, who I think Hawkinson is a pure tight end. That's exactly what you want. But with Fant, hey, let's split him out wide. Let's put him in motion. Let's put him in the slot. Let's, try to isolate some of those matchups and exploit the defense and what they're trying to do. And I think that's going to be really smart. And I remember Flacco, when he had Dennis Pitta in Baltimore, I mean, he did a really nice job of getting him the ball. They didn't have necessarily fantastic receivers in Baltimore while he was there. But, so I think he could develop a relationship with Flacco, and then also with Drew Lock. I think Drew was, a little, obviously he was, underdrafted. I mean, I think most people thought he was a first rounder, to sort of get him in the second round and trade up to do it was a smart move. So I think that's, I think they all can kind of collectively grow. So I'm not suggesting Noah Fant's going to be a Pro Bowler his first year or anything, but I think he's going to be an important role player. And as the season progresses, I can see him getting better. He was that way, I think, his sophomore year at Iowa, where he, his first 5 or 6 games, he was a good player. But in his last 5 or 6 games at Iowa, he was probably the best at his position in the country.
And before we wrap up Noah Fant here, I've seen him compared to the likes of like Eric Ebron or Jared Cook. And those guys, been productive receiving tight ends, but probably you want a little bit more for a first round pick. Granted, tight end's a devalued position in the NFL compared to wide receiver, offensive line, pass rushers, etc. What can make Noah Fant a better player than an Eric Ebron or a Jared Cook, and maybe even a better player than TJ Hawkinson down the road?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, Eric Ebron had some, physically they're similar in some ways. And so I could see the comparison. And I was talking to somebody last week about with the Lions, and that was a big concern, about TJ Hawkinson. I said, look, if you would have drafted Noah Fant, then I can understand some of the parallels there. And it's just from an ability standpoint. And then, and I wasn't in any way, shape, or form trying to say TJ Hawkinson's better, but just, okay, athletically, they're about the same. No, I think one of the things that I've seen out of Noah Fant is you've really got a committed guy. He's he is team-oriented. He's very polished as well. I mean, very few players I've encountered at Iowa just carry themselves with a charisma. And it's a confidence, but it's not an ego thing, but just carry themselves in a way where, he blends in well with his teammates. He's very articulate. I think he's going to be, he's going to be able to walk in the door and really kind of carry himself. I covered the Chiefs for 6 years. I'm not saying he's Tony Gonzalez, but he has that same kind of aura, probably that same type of ability. Can he transition from college to pro? Yeah, I'm not going there yet. Compare him to the greatest of all time, or one of the few. But as far as TJ Hawkinson goes, I think it's going to be a really interesting parallel track that they're going to be on. I mean, they competed with each other at Iowa. They weren't necessarily best friends, but they were friendly. And they were, competitive all the way through the draft as far as who was going to get drafted by whom. And, in the combine, their numbers were really similar and, in a lot of areas. So I don't know if I could make a prediction on who will be better. What I will say is if Noah Fant can become more consistent catching the ball, if he can find, the nuance of route running and get better at that within a year or two, he's going to be in the Pro Bowl. I think he's that good. Is he going to be better than Hawkinson? I don't know. I mean, Hawkinson could be there too.
Yeah.
And then you had George Kittle. I mean, 2016 Iowa could have been one of the greatest tight end rooms of all time, which we certainly did not see it at the time. That's for sure. I don't know if but I do think highly enough of Fant. I don't think he's a bust. I don't think he's Eric Ebron. He's not the type that's gonna just kind of shut down or quit or do anything like that. So I would say you've got at minimum a pretty good floor on him. I think Hawkinson's floor is higher, but I think Fant's ceiling is higher than Hawkinson just because of his athletic ability.
Absolutely. Well, we've been talking Noah Fant here, but we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to have Scott back on to talk a few more questions as it related to the Denver Broncos.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we're back on Building the Broncos podcast with Scott Dochterman, who covers the Iowa Hawkeyes for The Athletic. And, you're a Bears fan, Scott. You've been covering the Hawkeyes, so I got a couple more questions in here for you. I originally wanted to do Noah Fant-centric podcast. We did spend a majority of the time, but got to ask you about Josey Jewell in year 2. He had a solid year 1 for the Broncos, although somewhat limited, playing. He came in for Brandon Marshall, who had some injuries, but the Broncos, many people thought they'd go with a linebacker early in the draft, Devin White, Devin Bush, and they fooled everybody and didn't even draft a single true off-ball linebacker. Maybe Justin Hollins will be one. We'll see what he does when he comes in. But thoughts on Josey Jewell's first year and what he's going to be bringing year 2, because he's a guy that's projected to be a starter right now.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of those projections, whether or not they would try to get, say, Devin Bush at 10, and instead they traded back to get Fant. And with Josey Jewell, he doesn't blow you away athletically. He's better than what he was when he first came in. In fact, at Iowa, Kirk Ferentz said when they first picked him up, which was right at the end of the recruiting period, was at worst case scenario he'll be a fullback. And really it's about lateral movement as to whether or not you're going to be a fullback or a linebacker at Iowa. And in his case, he is athletically limited, especially at that level. And at times, if he's on one-on-one with a tight end or a receiver or even a running back, that's not a winnable matchup for him in space. He's just not quite as, quick as a lot of, those players. And I think you're asking him to do something that he is not necessarily not capable of doing, but I think, you're not putting him in a very good position and therefore not putting your defense in a good position. Now at Iowa, it's almost exclusively zone coverage, except when you're on the goal line. They don't run any cover, zero, very, very little cover one. So I think what Denver could do to help him. And I wonder about this with Vic Fangio, if he'll implement this, is, allow him to play more zone coverage, in that drop zone, maybe by the tight end. If he can play zone coverage or allowed to do that, then I think that mitigates most of his liabilities against the pass. And he is a very good, tackler. He's great. He's a great person to have on your team because he provides instant accountability. You have to perform when he's there. He's just not going to allow anybody to slack off. And you need those guys, even if they're not necessarily your best players or your best athletes, but you need those players to build in that accountability. So I think if Vic Fangio allows him to play more of his zone coverage, if that's how he incorporates it, and that's kind of how the Bears worked it, then I think that will enable him to again, kind of shield some of his deficiencies and allow him to succeed. And if that's the case, inside linebacker is a position where you can get by with a good player. You don't necessarily need a great one. And I think in Josey's case, that would allow him to, become, a net positive. And then it's up to Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, and the rest of the defense to kind of make the big plays.
Yeah, that was something I definitely emphasized after the Broncos drafted Josey Jewell and constantly saw, hey, Josey Jewell was, I think, the number one highest graded Pro Football Focus coverage linebacker in the entire draft. And, that's obviously, you've got to get a little bit excited about that. But in context to what he was asked to do and coming to what the Broncos were doing last year, asking him to play a lot more man coverage against tight ends or running backs, did not see that Pro Football Focus grade carrying over, and turns out that was the case in the end. So hopefully a little bit more zone coverage with Fangio coming over, which does seem like that's what they'll be bringing over. More cover two concepts will help Josey Jewell in pass coverage and the linebackers in general, Todd Davis as well. But you're a Bears fan, correct, Scott? I feel like listening to your podcast, you've always been you got Mark with the Packers and you with the Bears.
Yeah, we battle each other quite frequently. And so I appreciate the entire NFL. I watch it all, but I've been a Bears fan for about 40 years.
So I'm curious about your thoughts. I mean, obviously the Broncos bringing over Vic Fangio, the new head coach of the Denver Broncos, definite, everybody's saying the right buzzwords right now: culture changer, accountability, everybody showing up 5 minutes early for the meetings, all that stuff that you want to hear. Talk is cheap before anybody's even played a snap. But I'm curious about your thoughts about Vic Fangio's time in Chicago, what he did to turn around that defense. Obviously, great players to make great coaches, and bringing over like a Khalil Mack and adding some of that talent there has helped him a lot. But Vic Fangio, he's a guy that you've kind of gotten to know from where you're standing over the past couple of years in the Bears and what he's bringing to Denver.
He brought an accountability that the Bears needed, because defensively under Mark Trestman, that was an embarrassment. I remember back to back, I think it was a Sunday night game against Green Bay where they allowed 42 points in the first half and ended up giving up more than 50 and did it the same thing the next week or the week before against New England. And I just thought, with the Bears image, the way the Bears, the history of the Bears, that was, not only an embarrassment, but that was fireable, instantly fireable, because, the Bears have that tradition where it's like, well, they do lose from, more than we want, but at least play good defense. And what Vic Fangio did was, bringing in that 3-4, which obviously changes down in distance, but he brought you could see more of a disciplined front. And there were guys they traded for, guys they brought in, but you could see that there was more discipline with what that was. Akeem Hicks became a very good player. He was a good player, but I think he's a better player because of him. The rotations up front have been healthy for Chicago. They've, I don't know, they rotated 6 guys probably up front. That's primarily just tie up the blockers and allow the pass rushers to go. But, he got some good work out of Leonard Floyd, who's kind of one of those, I think the Bears just picked up his 5th-year option. He's probably one of those, well, do you or don't you guys? But, certainly he, whether it's, Khalil Mack's abilities, which we all know, combined with the scheme, he was terrific. And they've gotten a lot out of defensive backs that not necessarily people expected a lot out of. Adrian Amos just left and went to the Green Bay Packers, but was very good as a safety. And Eddie Jackson has done a really nice job, a mid-level draft pick. So they've been able to take a lot of those mid-draft picks and turn them into key contributors on the defense. So I expect him to be that way. That was one of the, when John Fox was let go, that he was the one I think everybody was excited to keep, not necessarily Buddy Ryan situation revisited in the early 80s, but certainly he had the defense going in the right direction. And after where it was sorely needed. So I think he's going to build in a lot of those things. I'm anxious to see what the offense does. Of course, there's a lot of room to grow there for Denver, but that's more your guys' area than mine. But
unfortunately, having to watch the Hawkeyes' inconsistencies on offense, which not terrible, but with the Broncos, especially coming off the Peyton Manning years, has been a transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Scott. Well, thank you very much for your time coming on here today. Do you have anything you want to promote before we get you on out of here?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to join you on this podcast. It'll be fun, and I've always enjoyed my days when I covered the Chiefs and going to Denver, and back in the early 2000s, it was quite fun, and some great battles there with Shanahan and Dick Vermeil. So again, thanks so much for allowing me to join your podcast, and hope to see some improvements out of Josey Jewell in year 2.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to have you on next year when the Broncos take Tristan Wirfs first overall.
In top 5? Well, maybe you don't want to draft there, but
it's kind of a double-edged sword with running a Denver Broncos draft podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's Alaric Jackson instead.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, well, thank you very much, and I think you're off to talk with Kirk Ferentz tonight.
Yeah. We've got our final television show tonight, the on Iowa Live on KCRG, the ABC affiliate. We have pretty much an hour with Kirk Ferentz going over the spring and other topics. So, yeah, it's going to be good to catch up with him before there's radio silence for over the next few months.
But you'll be there to fill the airwaves. So
yeah, hopefully.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and that was Scott Dochterman with The Athletic, covering the Iowa Hawkeyes, and been listening to him for a few years now, seen his work on The Athletic, and was excited to get him on the podcast. Carl, what were your general takeaways from the interview?
Well, I think it's a lot of just securing my thoughts, especially on Noah Fant. We talked about it a little bit of there might not have been anybody more happy of the Noah Fant pick than Scangarello. And just that fit of knowing this is that kind of guy you really needed to add to this offensive system. And so then to hear him talk about that too, I think he's a great fit for this system and what they need, being that red zone threat, being that field stretcher, and also just securing some thoughts on, I think, like he said, that Fant has been judged wrong on a lot of things, or judged not properly considering some of the things that were, having TJ Hawkinson next to him. Well, yeah, most every tight end out there is going to look like a really bad blocker compared to him. But when I watch Fant and you focus in on him and him alone, you sit there and say, well, this guy's actually doing some pretty good work out there. He's not just a receiving threat. You watch Evan Ingram and you're going, this guy's just a glorified receiver. You don't want this guy setting your edge, where Noah Fant, I'm sitting there saying, yeah, I could see him setting the edge and being okay with it. Again, he's not perfect at it, but he's not bottom 5 in the league either. and so that's nice to hear some of my own thoughts kind of really being secured in a guy that's watched this guy for 3 straight years and really seen what he brings to the table. And again, also just, I don't know if he was that great fit with Iowa and what they were wanting to do with their system. They do really seem to appreciate more of those inline tight ends like a TJ Hawkinson. And so Fant, it's kind of one of those things. He's one of those tight ends you have to know how to use them. If you don't have a plan, it's not going to end well.
I mean, what did Scangarello say to him as soon as he was drafted? It's about the system fit.
Yeah, it is. It is. And so, I mean, that's why TJ Hawkinson, I understand why he went first before Fant, because he's a better fit. I mean, every team needs a TJ Hawkinson. I mean, you get a guy like that and you're just, I mean, he's a plug and play. You put him in your starting offense. He is a receiving threat. He's a blocking threat. He does a little bit of everything that you want. So it makes sense. But Fant, I do feel like if he's in that right system, which I do think the Broncos are that right system, that he could actually be the more productive player of the two.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, it definitely does validate a lot of my opinions of Fant as well. Scott dropped in a lot of good knowledge of specifics as far as the statistical output of both the Broncos and Iowa, but Fant being a guy who, the catching ability is sometimes a concern. And, as much as Broncos country or Demaryius Thomas caught the ire of Broncos country with his drops, I'm kind of a little bit worried because Fant is probably going to have a few drops early in his career. It's something he's going to have to work on. But as far as the toughness over the middle and his ability to catch and create after contact, make guys miss, those are two things that I've seen harped about him. And I will say, I do agree with Scott to a point where the making guys miss is a little bit overblown. Still, I would like to see Fant, be a little bit more sudden and nuanced with the ball in his hand to make a guy miss. But when he has the speed that he had and the open field opportunities that he had, most of the time he's not going to have to make guys miss. He's just going to run past them. So not as concerned about that. But as far as the contested catch ability, again, it really makes me think of O.J. Howard coming out of Alabama, because everyone's like, oh, yeah, he's pretty decent blocker, bordering on good, could be great. And, he's a good athlete. If you get the ball to him in space, he can do a lot of things, stretch the teams vertically. But is he a contested catch guy? Because they just never did that at Alabama. And that's something we saw at Iowa. I mean, they did not give him much opportunities to be a contested catch guy, which, considering his size and his leaping ability, was really head scratching. So that's something, I mean, it's a projection at this point to say that he can be a really good contested catch guy. And with the windows being smaller in the NFL, he's going to have to. But it is reassuring to hear that it's more of something that we just don't know based on the tape, as compared to, yes, this is a real concern for him. So that makes, since we're in the offseason, we can hope on that one a little bit.
Right. Well, and I do think it's a little bit, like he said, there's some of those games where Noah Fant's not seeing a target until sometimes the fourth quarter.
Yeah, that's kind of the nature of the tight end too, but at the same time, what are you doing?
Right. But when you have a weapon like Noah Fant, you're trying to design plays early on in a game to get him going.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of times we saw it with DT where if you didn't get him early involved in the game, he just never quite got things going. And, when I look at his receptions for Noah Fant, 30 catches in his 2017, 39 catches this last year. I just feel like he's one of those guys you should be getting 60 to 70 touches in some way, somehow, with that kind of athleticism on the field. And I think if you can do that, sometimes just getting those extra targets, even if they're little screen passes, swing passes, comeback routes, whatever you want to do out there just to get him involved early. And maybe it is only a 5-yard play, but I feel like that can help a player really get more engaged and ready for the football coming at him and for those big moments. I'm not saying that his drops aren't part of his game, because they are. He is more of a body catcher than you would like. I talk about that all the time when I'm looking at receivers. Are they a body catcher or are they a natural hands catcher? And he's not the most natural hands catcher. So I do expect that there's still going to be some drops. I really do. But it is something that he can improve on some. And like I said, if you can scheme him open, there's a lot that can happen with him on the field. Yeah,
absolutely. And, a lot of stuff we've been talking about on here was hit on. I really do like that he also confirmed the Josey Jewell concerns. Everybody talking about Pro Football Focus, great tool, but it's just a part of the equation rather than being the answer when it comes to football analysis. And Josey Jewell being really highly graded in pass coverage coming into the NFL draft, I think the highest rated linebacker in pass coverage. Well, to me, that had a lot more to do with the scheme and what he was asked to do and more importantly, what he was asked not to do or what he wasn't asked to do. And coming into Denver, did not love that scheme fit, being more man, having to cover guys, trail guys. That's not his game. But moving to more zone system, there's some untapped potential there, at least as far as the pros go. So excited to see that and glad to hear that he, just hammered home that point.
Right. And then on the Vic Fangio, that he really is that guy that brings that kind of discipline. I was watching something earlier today. I think DenverBroncos.com put it out of the Baltimore game. Broncos had 120 yards in penalties. There was that huge play where they block the kick and Chris Harris runs it back for a touchdown. And there's a stupid penalty that on a player that didn't even really be involved in the play. I mean, Chris Harris is already running for a touchdown and a player comes up and hits another player in the back. Uncalled for. But you look at that and you just say, that's why the Broncos are that. I mean, that's why they've lost 2 years in a row, that they've had losing records. Those stupid decisions, it irritates you. And so to know that you're having a coach that comes in and demands that these guys pay attention to those little details, that they eliminate those kind of stupid mistakes. I mean, that's 7 points off the board.
Yeah.
And then when most games are decided by 7 points or less, that's a game decider. And like you even look at the impact of the momentum in the moment. I mean, there's just so many things that happen with that. And so to know coming to the Broncos is a coach that really demands the best out of the players. I'm excited to see that from Fangio.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Building the Broncos podcast, powered by Overtime Media. Thanks to Scott Dochterman again for joining us today to talk the new Denver Bronco tight end Noah Fant, as well as Josey Jewell and Vic Fangio. And make sure you follow Scott on Twitter at Scott Dochterman. That's DOCHTERMAN, and his work over at The Athletic covering the Iowa Hawkeyes. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Kendell MHH. Also, make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find more content covering the Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl and Scott, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you guys soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.